Welcome to a very special episode of the Genealogy Gems podcast. I'm Lisa Louise Cook, and this is episode 259. Last Christmas, I had the opportunity to interview Tom Hegg. He's the author of the now very famous book, A Cup of Christmas Tea. And it was such a joy to speak with him, and what a surprise that he read his story for us. In this episode, we're bringing that audio to you from the video interview that I did last year with a little couple of special additions that I think will bring some happiness and holiday joy to your ears. So without further ado, let's get started. The book, A Cup of Christmas Tea, was written by Tom Hegg, and it's illustrated by Warren Hanson, and it's a simple, heartwarming story of how one man's reluctant visit to an elderly aunt's house really renews his holiday spirit and brings him some unexpected joy. And the book debuted way back in 1992 on the New York Times Bestseller list. Not exactly an overnight sensation. It was already in print for 10 years. But once it hit that list, boy, it was on there for 3 more years, which is pretty unprecedented in the world of publishing. And to date, this book has become a classic. It has sold more than 1.5 million copies. Charles Kuralt once said, quote, "I have a feeling that this little green book will be around for a long time, raising lumps in throats and smiles on faces. To it, I raise a cup of Christmas tea." Many of you have been sharing with me as well how much you have enjoyed the book, which is kind of like a Night Before Christmas type poem with a very different story. And some of you I know have gotten the book since I first announced we were going to do this, so you're just in for such a treat today. Beth wrote in and she said, "Many years ago, I heard the author read A Cup of Christmas Tea on the radio, and I fell in love with it. We listened to his reading every year as part of our Christmas." And Dana, who's also known as Jean Buds in the live chat, she wrote in to say, "I remember that story in Guidepost, sometime after my late mother gave me the book." She says, after her mother gave her the book, very special memories are attached to it all. Later, she gave me the whole tea set. This morning, my husband got out our mugs for our ritual of morning tea, and I took one look and I cried out, "Oh, no, 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 it has to be the special teacups." Well, grab your special teacup and join me with a visit with Tom Hegg, the author of A Cup of Christmas Tea. Well, hello, Tom Hegg. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Happy holidays. I'm so happy to be here. This is great.
You have just written the book that just kind of sums up the heart of Christmas. It's A Cup of Christmas Tea. Boy, has this book taken off. Did you ever imagine that you'd be selling millions of copies and having people read it all around the world?
Oh, goodness, no. It was going to be a poem that I read one time at my church, and that was going to be the end of it. But it had a life beyond that, much to my surprise and delight.
It sure has. You know, I know many people have already gotten a copy. I've got my copy, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it and shared it with my family. But if somebody hasn't read the book, give us kind of I don't know if synopsis isn't the right word, the heart of it. What's this story about?
I tell you what, why don't I read the story?
Would you? I would love it. Okay, hang on. I've got my tea. I'm ready. Take it, Tom.
This is A Cup of Christmas Tea. The log was in the fireplace, all spiced and set to burn. At last, the yearly Christmas race was in the clubhouse turn. The cards were in the mail, all the gifts beneath the tree, and 30 days reprieve till Visa could catch up with me. And though smug satisfaction seemed the order of the day, something still was nagging me and would not go away. A week before, I got a letter from my old great aunt. It read, "Of course, I'll understand completely if you can't, but if you find you have some time, How wonderful if we could have a little chat and share a cup of Christmas tea. She'd had a mild stroke that year, which crippled her left side. Though housebound now, my folks had said it hadn't hurt her pride. They said she'd love to see you. What a nice thing it would be for you to go and maybe have a cup of Christmas tea. But boy, I didn't want to go. Oh, what a bitter pill to see an old relation and how far she'd gone downhill. I remembered her as vigorous, as funny, and as bright. I remembered Christmas Eves when she regaled us half the night. I didn't want to risk all that. I didn't want the pain. I didn't need to be depressed. I didn't need the strain. And what about my brother? Why not him? She's his aunt too. I thought I had to justify it, but then before I knew the reasons not to go, I so painstakingly had built were cracking wide and crumbling in an acid rain of guilt. I put on boots and gloves and cap, shame stinging every pore, and armed with squeegee, sand, and map, I went out my front door. I drove in from the suburbs to the older part of town. The pastels of the newer homes gave way to gray and brown. I had that disembodied feeling as the car pulled up and stopped beside the wooden house that held the Christmas cup. How I got up to her door, I really couldn't tell. I watched my hand rise up and press the button of the bell. I waited, aided by my nervous rocking to and fro, and just as I was thinking I should turn around and go, I heard the rattle of the china in the hutch against the wall. The triple beat of 2 feet and a crutch came down the hall. The clicking of the door latch and the sliding of the bolt and a little swollen struggle popped it open with a jolt. She stood there, pale and tiny, looking fragile as an egg. I forced myself from staring at the brace that held her leg. And though her thick bifocals seemed to crack and spread her eyes, their milky and refracted depths lit up with young surprise. "Come in! Come in!" She laughed the words. She took me by the hand, and all my fears dissolved away, as if by her command. We went inside, and then, before I knew how to react, before my eyes and ears and nose, was Christmas past, alive, intact. The scent of candied oranges, of cinnamon and pine, the antique wooden soldiers in their military line, the porcelain nativity I'd always loved so much, the Dresden and the crystal I'd been told I mustn't touch. My spirit fairly bolted like a child out of class and danced among the ornaments of calico and glass. Like magic, I was 6 again, deep in a Christmas spell, steeped in the million memories the boy inside knew well. And here, among old Christmas cards, so lovingly displayed, a special place of honor for the ones we kids had made. And there, beside her rocking chair, the center of it all, my great aunt stood and said, how nice it was I'd come to call. I sat and rattled on about the weather and the flu. She listened very patiently, then smiled and said, "What's new?" Thoughts and words began to flow. I started making sense. I lost the phony breeziness I use when I get tense. She was still passionately interested in everything I did. She was positive, encouraging, like when I was a kid. Simple generalities still sent her into fits. She demanded the specifics, the particulars, the bits. We talked about the limitations that she'd had to face. She spoke with utter candor and with humor and good grace. Then, defying the reality of crutch and straightened knee, on wings of hospitality, she flew to brew the tea. I sat alone with feelings that I hadn't felt in years. I looked around at Christmas through a thick, hot blur of tears. And the candles and the holly she'd arranged on every shelf, the impossibly good cookies she still somehow baked herself, but these rich, tactile memories became quite pale and thin when measured by the Christmas my great aunt kept deep within. Her body halved and nearly spent, but my great aunt was whole. I saw a Christmas miracle, the triumph of a soul. The triple beat of 2 feet and a crutch came down the hall, the rattle of the china in the hutch against the wall. She poured 2 cups, she smiled, and then she handed one to me, and then we settled back and had a cup of Christmas tea.
That was beautiful. Now, see, I have the hot blur of tears. How do you read it without tearing up? I mean, the picture that you paint as you speak it, and like I'm sure you've told as many stories and you've read it many times, but I can tell that it just feels personal. It feels personal to us listening, but is it personal to you too?
Oh, very, very much so. The character of the great aunt was based upon my 2 grandmothers who lived with us in a triplex. My maternal grandmother was on the 3rd floor. My paternal grandmother was on the 2nd floor. And they were very, very different women indeed. My grandmother on the 3rd floor, my Grandma Sully, her name was Jeanette Sullivan, was not educated beyond the 3rd grade. She was orphaned at the age of 5 in a terrible way. Her mother was a doctor, and they were in Chicago, and she was ill. Desperately ill, but a word went out to that a woman was delivering babies and was in difficulty, and she went. And when she got back home after delivering the baby, she fell down a flight of stairs in front of my grandmother, and she died instantly.
Oh.
And my grandmother was adopted by a family that used her essentially as a slave girl, physically abused her. And she ran away at the age of 9 to her sisters in a different city. She went from Chicago to St. Louis. And she lived there until she was 12, at which point she went up to Chicago and got a job as a hotel maid. And it was there that she met my grandfather, Cornelius John Sullivan. And they moved after they got married. He was 30, she was 18. They moved to Minneapolis, where they weathered the Great Depression and had 6 children, 5 of whom survived to adulthood. And my paternal grandmother, who lived on the 2nd floor, was highly educated. She was had a bachelor degree from the University of Minnesota, class of 1898. She was captain of the girls' basketball team when they had the baskets that still had the bottoms in it, and you had to pull a string. And she and my grandfather, Hegg, would correspond in several different languages while she was at the University of Minnesota and he was in seminary in Decorah, Iowa. They were ultimately married and they went into the ministry together. And so I had very different experiences with my grandmother on the 2nd floor and my grandmother on the 3rd floor. But as different as they were from each other, I was always absolutely safe, I knew, in their company. And that is why the aunt became who she ultimately became. She's a reflection of both of those women.
What an amazing opportunity as a child to grow up with that kind of safety and security and love and just being enveloped by grandmothers. You know, that's wonderful. And you really knew their story. So I think it's interesting for somebody who had such a traumatic story as your first grandmother that you mentioned did. You clearly know it. Did she share that very readily, or what kind of conversational relationship did you have?
I found out about all of that from my mother, not from her, because she had a very difficult time talking about things like that. And so that whole story came to me by way of my mom.
Well, and that really shows, gosh, you could be talking to somebody across the table and just not realize the kind of story that's there with them.
That's right.
And the need to inquire. And it sounds like they had quite an influence on you.
Oh, very much so.
Well, and you certainly convey a real appreciation for a connection, particularly with elderly relatives.
Yes.
So that, of course, begs the question in my world is, do you know much about your family history? Did that translate into an interest in family history?
We were not able to find anything on my grandmother Sullivan's side of the family because there was a fire apparently in the Hall of Records, and all of that was lost. So my grandmother Sullivan, her background was rather a mystery to her as well, because she was orphaned when she was so young.
Right.
The closest thing that we could find out was that she had been born in Germany, not the States. And she thought that she had been born in the States, but it turned out that she was born in Germany. Came over during the Chicago fire, which is what took the records. And so it's been difficult, very, very difficult to find anything at all beyond her generation as to who she was. There was always some sort of a talk about being related to some sort of a German baron, but that's as much as I know about it. So it's a mystery. The other side of the family is a little bit better known.
Yeah. The Hegg.
Yes. Norwegian.
Well, you said that the grandparents talked to each other in multiple languages.
Yes, they spoke to Norwegian, of course, which was first language for both of them, and in English and in Latin. They would correspond, that way. And that thought didn't go into the next generation because the generation that had my grandparents wanted all of the children to speak English. We're Americans now. We're not Norwegians anymore.
Sounds like my great-grandparents' house.
Yeah, very much so.
So you mentioned that the great aunt is kind of a compilation of the grandmothers, and
Yes.
But you grew up with them. Does this feel like a personal story for you as the young man, or was it just something maybe you saw in other people and how they responded to?
Oh, no, I learn a great deal from this story about the importance of going where you're needed and going where you should be. I'm as guilty as the young man in the story for all of those thoughts that he thought about not wanting to go, about wanting to push all of that aside and have it easy Christmas without much personal sacrifice or
And I have to say, as an author, my gosh, you captured that well. I was thinking as you were reading that part, oh my gosh, is he inside all of our heads? We've all had at some point that experience of, I don't want to go, and then yet the best things can happen out of that.
That's right, they do.
Stay tuned, because Tom's going to share what prompted him to write this story, and he's going to share another Christmas story right after this. Today's episode is sponsored by MyHeritage, a global discovery platform enjoyed by 110 million people worldwide. MyHeritage has it all and offers a full-service experience that bridges your past, present, and future. The MyHeritage DNA Kit reveals your ethnic origins and finds your new relatives based on shared DNA. It's popular all over the world, and their constantly growing DNA database means that more matches to new relatives are just around the corner. You'll receive a percentage breakdown of your ethnic origins from 42 supported regions and weekly email updates as new DNA matches are found. It's also the leading DNA service for anyone with European origins. Make the most of your DNA results with a MyHeritage subscription and access advanced tools for genetic genealogy, like the theory of family relativity, autoclusters, shared ancestral places, and much more. Order your kit today at myheritage.com/DNA. Already taken a DNA test with another service? Upload your DNA data to MyHeritage for free to receive DNA matches and access new discoveries. That's myheritage.com/DNA. This holiday season, I want to give a gift to my loved ones that makes them feel special and unique, just like the relationships that we share. And that's why I love giving Storyworth. Storyworth is an online service that helps you and your loved ones preserve precious memories and stories for years to come. It's a really thoughtful and meaningful gift that connects you to those who matter the most. Every week, Storyworth emails your relative or your friend a thought-provoking question of your choice from their vast pool of possible options. Don't worry, you don't have to come up with the questions. They've got wonderful questions. And each unique prompt asks these questions that you might never have thought of to ask, like, what's the bravest thing you've ever done in your life? Or if you could see into the future, what would you want to find out? But yes, you can even ask your own questions as well. And then after 1 year, Storyworth will compile all your loved ones' stories, including photographs, into a beautiful keepsake book that you'll be able to share and future generations are going to be able to really enjoy. It's amazing that in the end, you have this wonderful printed book. And reading the weekly stories helps you connect with your loved ones no matter how far apart you are. I love my mom's stories about working at the A&W on roller skates in the 1950s. I mean, it's just amazing. And so when the year is complete, you have something really tangible that can be shared for years and generations to come. With Storyworth, I'm giving those I love most a thoughtful, personal gift from the heart and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/gems and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/gems to save $10 on your first purchase. And now back to more with New York Times bestselling author Tom Hegg. So what prompted the writing of the story? Goodness, you've sold 1.5 million copies. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list, but I'm guessing that it maybe wasn't the easiest road to get it there. Where did it start? How was this story born?
I was asked by my church to do a reading of A Christmas Story for the annual congregational choir dinner. And so I thought, well, why don't I try to write something especially for it? And I had ignorance working for me because I didn't know that I couldn't write. And so it came to me over a space of 3 days onto a yellow legal pad.
Wow.
And on the first night that I read it, people kept on saying, you know, you need to do something with this. And so I did. I met Warren Hanson, who is the illustrator of the books, and I got his number from the editor of Minneapolis St. Paul magazine, who said, yep, Warren's the best in town, but you'll never get him. And I read the story to him when I got him on the line over the phone. And after I was done, he said, I'm in.
Well, and you painted the pictures, didn't you? I mean, even if you've never, and the illustrations are absolutely beautiful and capture it so well. But my goodness, just in your own words, you've painted a real picture.
Well, thank you.
And I read somewhere that you have a theater background. That's something that we share in common.
Yeah,
And certainly it makes you a wonderful person just to read your story and the way you've just infused it with the feelings in the moment. I can tell you're in the moment. How does your theater background play into this, moving into the world of being an author?
Well, I played Charles Dickens at the Guthrie Theater in a production of A Christmas Carol. And when I started thinking about writing something myself, the thought of Dickens having taken up his pen and written about a story that probably became the best known of his canon, Christmas as a way of giving presents to people who are in that kind of position and who want to do something as far as adding to Christmas literature. So I had the opportunity, I took it, and I got very, very lucky indeed.
You created a little bit of luck, though. I was reading that you shared the story with some notable people, and one notable woman who I'm very familiar with her work said she loved it. Helen Hayes. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I had a friend who knew her, and he said, why don't you just drop her a copy and see what she has to say about it? And so I did, and I didn't hear back for 6 months because I didn't know she lived in Mexico during the winter. And so one day in the spring, I got a postcard from Helen Hayes and said that your story filled me with tears of joy. I hope you get it published. Helen Hayes. And if you're going to get that kind of encouragement from the First Lady of the American Theater, you're going to take that advice.
Absolutely. Couldn't you just imagine her playing the great aunt?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that would be
just
amazing.
What I had in mind.
I bet. A lot of people are struggling to be connected and to see family this season. And what words of encouragement can you give them on the importance? Yeah.
Make that visit. I can't tell you how many times I've received letters or calls from people saying, I was driving along and this story called A Cup of Christmas Tea came on the radio and it caught my attention. I pulled over to the side of the road and listened, and then I made a U-turn and I decided to pay a visit that I had earlier decided I wasn't going to make, and that has made all the difference.
So true. I had a viewer write me a note about being out on a genealogy research trip, and she started seeing some family names on street signs, and she was just couldn't rummage up the courage to go knock on the door. And her husband's like, what are we doing this for if it's not to go knock on the door? And she did, and we did a little video of it. And I thought, there's so many opportunities. It's not that they don't present themselves. I think oftentimes we're the ones who kind of get in the way, and it's...
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
Quite true.
Well, and you didn't let not being an author get in the way of writing a best-selling book. And you've written more because, this book, it speaks to the heart of adults, I think. And I think even young people, you just want to send it to all your kids and your grandkids to give them that reminder that there are other people beyond, just their generation, and that everybody has a story to tell. But you've also written for children. Tell us about how that came to be, because I imagine, you had some success, so you had an opportunity to kind of capitalize on it, but it has a very unique name. Tell us about your children's stories.
Oh, Peef the Christmas Berry is the story of a little teddy bear that Santa Claus makes with his own hands. And he asks each of the elves to bring their favorite piece of cloth to him, and he's going to sew it into a bear. So the bear is representative of everyone. He touches it, which is breathing the breath of life into it, and the little bear says his name, Peef, for the very, very first time. And Peef and Santa become partners, and Peef helps him with all of the chores that he has to do as the Christmas season approaches, and takes that magical ride around the world with him. But oftentimes, when he goes along with Santa, he hears a piercing squeal of purest joy and looks in a window and sees a little girl or a boy and a teddy bear together for the first time. And he realizes that his own destiny as a teddy bear is not to be on Santa's turf on the North Pole, but to be given to a child. And Santa ultimately senses that this is the little bear's heart's desire, and knowing that he may come to harm, gives Peef away on Christmas at the last stop he's going to make. He says, Peef, how many years have I been doing this? a ton. I can't believe I'm short of toys, and yet I am by one. But there was something special in the tone of Santa's voice that told the little bear that this mistake was made by choice. And Peef looked up at Santa, and the old man looked ahead, his eyes alight with, well, I'm not sure just what. Then Santa said, we have a special duty to the children, you and I. We can't forget a single one. You know the reasons why. We have to think of them before we think about ourselves. Besides, we have to set a good example for the elves. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Then he could say no more. And for a little time they sat together on the shore of Christmas Day that washed the far horizon of the night. And as the sleigh began to move again, a growing light began to glow against the inky canopy of sky until a bright aurora borealis filled the eye of heaven. Oh, the colors that adorn the Christmas air, all radiating from the heart of one small teddy bear. The little fellow peeped for joy. His dream was coming true, for soon a little boy or girl would say, Peef, I love you. And that's the story.
Oh, it's just beautiful. I love the story of how that came to be. You took 24 hours just to do nothing. And I thought,
that's right.
That's a hard thing to do. And yet there's magic that can come out of something like that. I love to have you share that with people because I love how this came to be.
Well, I wanted to do a book for children and for Christmas. And so I decided to take one day off completely during Christmas vacation. I'm a teacher, was a teacher by profession, and lie down on the sofa and just look at the Christmas tree and let my mind wander, wool gather, go where it will. And I took a nap, and when I woke up from the nap, the outline for the story was in my head. Not the name of the little bear, but the plot line. I knew what the story was going to be. And when Warren Hanson, the illustrator I mentioned earlier, first heard the story, he said, well, you know what this story is, don't you? And I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, this is the Christmas story.
Yes.
This is a father giving a son to the world, knowing that he is going to come to harm.
Mm-hmm. And selflessly so. And it's amazing how those things, those nuggets, those, I call them gems, they reside in all of us. Sometimes we just have to be quiet enough for them to be able to come out.
Very, very true. The time that you spent thinking, meditating, contemplating is every bit as important as the time you spend actually writing.
And you reached back into your own personal history a little bit to name Peef, right? P-E-E-F, Peef. Where did that come from?
My brother is 5 years my senior, and he had a stuffed toy collection that was in place, the Comito family, he called them, when I was born. And some of them had little squeakers in the tummy. And my brother Jimmy would say, Tommy, make the bear go Peef, because he decided that that squeak sound was, when transliterated into English, was P-E-E-F. And so that's how Peef got his name, from my brother Jimmy.
It's such a joy to talk with you about this. I'm thrilled that you read this story for us. I love that the fact that you have shared how special things happen. We call those genealogical serendipity in the genealogy world, you know, and it's stuff you can't even plan. And some of the best things certainly come from that. Anything else you want to share? Anything else you've got coming up, or where people can also find you if they want to learn more about your wonderful work?
Tristan.com is the address to use if you want to make any kind of connection for any reason at all, to buy a book, to buy a bear, or to say hello. It'll eventually reach me if it gets to Tristan.com. I'm also working on a memoir, which is called Last call at Jimmy Hegg's, which follows my father and mother's career in downtown Minneapolis as restaurant owners. They had many tales to tell, and so I'm working on that as well.
Oh, how wonderful. Who knows? They may have known my husband's great-grandmother was a milliner. She made hats in Minneapolis. Probably back around the same time. So
probably.
Maybe a connection. Tom Hegg, thank you so much for being on the show, for reading your story, and for sharing your little guy, Peef. I think there's a lot of kids who could benefit from that story as well this Christmas. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Lisa.